What's up guys, I'm Ethan Carter and welcome back to the channel. My buddy Nick over the channel Build Dad Build does a lot of Shou Sugi Ban projects and he uses this amazing grill gun by GrillBlazers to do it. He recently reached out to me to see if I could make him a custom leather holster for it. I'm not gonna lie, the design of this gun adds some interesting complexities to a typical holster, but I told him I'd give it a shot, so let's see what I can come up with. Let's get to it. While there were a lot of design features I still needed to figure out, one thing I knew I wanted to do was wet form the outside of the holster to take the shape of the gun. To do that, I first started by finding a piece of leather that was a good bit larger than I needed to cover from the trigger down to the typical front of a gun. Next, I wrapped the grill gun with plastic wrap to protect it from the water during the wet forming process. To wet form this chrome tan leather, I submerged the piece into some boiling water and then let it come back up to room temperature. Then I gave the leather a quick pat dry and then draped it over the gun. To hold the leather in place while I formed it, I used my staple gun to staple it to a scrap piece of wood. I made sure to leave at least an inch from the gun's edges to leave plenty of room to cut away the staple holes later. Then I just started to form the leather around the contours of the gun with my fingers. I usually work it consistently for the first 10 minutes or so, and then quickly form it every 15 minutes for another hour or so. Then I usually leave everything in the form overnight until it dries completely. Don't be discouraged if it doesn't look like it's getting a lot of definition at first. I find that it starts taking shape the more and more it dries. Alright guys, the wet forming of the grill gun is done. I'm really happy with how it took the shape of the grill gun. But now comes the tricky part, figuring out how to make this into an actual usable holster. One of the challenges that we have with this is that this is wider, and so it doesn't allow you to slide the gun down like you typically would in a normal holster. So what I think I'm going to do is stitch this side to the back just like I typically would, and that will act as almost like a pivot. Cut along this side and leave that side open, and then create some snaps from the back to here, and then maybe add a strap from here to here with another snap, and that will allow me to keep that side open and slide the gun into the holster versus going down into the holster like you typically would. So that's my idea, at least right now. We'll figure it out as we go. Let's get to it. Before I remove the staples, I used my scratch awl to score the cut lines. For the top of the gun, I left about a 1/4 inch of material to leave room for the stitch line. On the underside of the gun, I scored the line right at the base because that side won't need the room for the stitch line. Then I simply remove the staples. To trim the leather to size, I used my trusty X-Acto knife and just cut along the cut lines I had made. Next, I used the gun and the front piece to create a template for the backing of the holster. The backing of the holster will run the entire length of the gun, including the torch head. It will also have a rectangular section at the top with 2 slots for a belt to run through. Once I was happy with the template, I used it to trace the cut lines onto a large piece of leather and then cut it out with my X-Acto knife. To add some strength where it attaches to your belt, I cut a second rectangular piece to attach to the backing. To cut the belt slots, I used an inexpensive curve punch to cut uniform curves at the top and the bottom, and then just connected them with my X-Acto and a straight edge. I plan to add a strap from the front of the holster to the backing with a snap, so before I attach the 2 rectangular pieces, I added 1/2 of the snap to the front rectangular piece. Since I was going to be gluing to a finished side of leather, I used my leather rougher to scuff it up, which helps create a better bond. Then I used some Tandy Leather Eco Weld adhesive to connect the two rectangular pieces together. Once the adhesive was tacky, I simply pressed the two pieces together. Next, I moved on to adding the stitching holes. I started by using my wing divider to score the stitching line around the edge. Then I used my pricking irons to punch the stitching holes. To ensure the spacing between each hole stays consistent as I work my way down the line, I always make sure to place the stitching chisel point furthest to the left in the last hole of the previous set of holes I punched. I also added some stitching holes on the inside edge of the belt slots for some added strength. I recently made a video dedicated to leather stitching where I go in depth into the process of how to do the saddle stitch and others, and I'll leave a link above if you want to check it out. But at a high level, what I found is easiest is to just pick a sequence and then stick to that. For example, I always start using the right needle to stitch from the back and then stitch the left needle from the front into the same hole but in front and under the right needle's thread. If you continue this sequence, you'll get a very nice looking stitch pattern in my experience. Since the bottom of the backing is just one piece of leather, it's very floppy as you can see. So to add some rigidity but not too much weight, I found a thin scrap piece of aluminum bar to run the length of the backing. I again used some Eco Weld to sandwich the bar between the backing and another piece of leather, and then did the same process as before to add the saddle stitch around the whole thing. With that done, I moved on to adding some straps to secure the gun into the holster. I added two straps from the backing to the front along the underside of the gun, and then one strap from the front of the holster across the gun handle to the backing. For each strap, I glued and stitched one side of the strap to the leather using a box and cross pattern for extra strength. Next, I moved on to attaching the front and back pieces together along the top edge. I again roughed up the finished side of the backing, glued the two pieces together, and then stitched them together. Then I switched back to the straps. I purposely left all the straps long until the stitching was done to allow me to get the perfect placement of the snap to provide the right tension. To add the snaps to each strap, I used my hole punch and snap setting kit from Tandy Leather. Once all the snaps were attached, I trimmed off the excess leather using the curve punch again, but you could also easily do this by hand. Alright guys, as you can see, the idea of sliding it in versus going down worked out great. I'm really pleased with that. So that issue is resolved, but on to the next one, which is what to do about this torch head. So as you can imagine, it can get extremely hot, especially right after you use it, and definitely hot enough to burn your leg. So I need to figure out some way of preventing that and keeping it safe. So first, I started by extending the leather down, which is part of it, but it will burn the leather just as easily. So I need to figure out something else. So what I think I'm going to do is I got this heat shield that plumbers use, and it's this fabric that is fire resistant up to like 2,500 degrees, I think it is. And so what I think I'm going to do is somehow cup it behind the torch head so that it creates a barrier between the torch head and the leather. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do that yet, but let's go see what I can figure out. To create the protective heat barrier, I started by cutting a piece of leather 7 inches by 7 inches. This left me enough material to fold over the top and the bottom just enough to sandwich some wires that will help create a cupping shape to surround the torch head. All I had was some thin galvanized wire, so I ended up taping 3 pieces together to add more strength to hold the shape. Then I sandwiched the wires in the folded over channels and glued and stitched the leather just like I did before. Next, I attached it to the holster backing. With that attached, I moved on to adding the heat shield material. I started by cutting it the same size as the piece we just made. Since I'm not sure how the stitching would hold up to the heat, I decided to attach the heat shield to the leather using metal rivets. I punched the holes for the rivets in the heat shield, then glued it to the backing. Then I punched the holes all the way through the leather and added the rivets using a cheap rivet setting set I got off Amazon. With everything attached, the only thing left was to bend the wires to shape, cupping the heat shield around the back and the sides of the torch head. And with that, the holster was done. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting that subscribe and bell button. I also post a lot of behind the scenes and smaller scale projects as Ethan Carter Designs on Instagram, and would love to have you follow me there as well. Alright guys, I think we are done. I'm not going to lie, going into this project I wasn't sure I was going to be able to make a functioning holster for this grill gun, but I think I did, and I really like how it looks too. I was worried this was going to be so bulky that it would kind of ruin the look, but I think it works. So yeah, I'm really pleased with how it came out. I hope Nick likes it as well, and thanks for checking out the channel. Until next time, keep making.